coming to you live from Seattle, Washington. We are here today to talk about physics and networking. So real quick, what I want to do is give a quick little recap of where we are at with the Kickstarter. Washington. We are here right now. We are at 536 backers, $52,756, and we are under 3 days in. This has been amazing. You guys have been awesome in supporting us and trying to achieve our goal of 100,000. I'm expecting that with your help, we're going to be reaching several of our stretch goals. So let's keep on pushing, keep on letting everybody you know that this thing is happening. If you know anybody who's interested in this kind of game or is an FPS player, maybe looking for more of a challenge, looking to move faster with their game, they're tired of the kind of Counter-Strike, let's walk around for 10 minutes on the ground and shoot people with guns that hit instantly kind of thing. Like, show them this game, show them how awesome it can be. Use some of the VODs that we took over the last couple nights with our pickup games. Show them what true gaming really is, and show them Midair. So I have here with me Mabel, who is one of the programmers on the team and is heavily involved in the game design of Midair, as well as some of the core engine programming, including things like the physics and also the networking as well. So Mabel, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself?
Hi. Well, I mean, you did a pretty good job, I think. Mabel, I do all the things Chris said I does.
What is your experience in the FPSZ genre?
So I come to this from playing Legions, which I played. I did play T2 first, but I was so bad. I don't know if it even counts, to be honest. And so I played Legions a bunch for a long while. And then I played TA, and I was pretty good at that, won a couple things. And here I am now. So. Well,
in between that, you and I had worked on actually Legions Overdrive, which was the kind of extension, the community extension of what was Fallen Empire Legions, done by Garage Games and Instant Action. And if for the folks who don't know, what we did was we actually pulled it away from their platform and play the Tribes style gameplay, and so that's how we started. So I think it's actually a pretty interesting story.
Oh, that's true. It just totally slipped my mind.
Well, I mean, it's been 2 years since we started, so I totally understand that that's started here. It was actually because when Tribes Ascend came out, Mabel and I looked at each other and said, hey, we should see if we can make a mark on this genre in a way that really does justice to the FPSZ style gameplay, the Tribes style gameplay, and so that's how we started. So I think it's actually a pretty interesting story.
Oh, that's true. It just totally slipped my mind.
Well, I mean, it's been 2 years since we started, so I totally understand that that's.
I mean, it's been like 6 years since we did that, so it's just kind of just I'm just back there,
Yeah, right. I mean, at least during the time that we've been there, I mean, people have grown so much. Like, we've done so many things that I never thought we'd achieve. In the sense of, like, a game like this, and even an enterprise like what we were trying to do with a game dev studio is a risky business. I mean, statistically, it's like one in 7 businesses makes it or something like that.
I don't want to know.
The stats always change, right? So the fact that, like, and if you think about video games, like that's even worse, right? So that's one of those things. Like, the fact that we've been able to push through for 2 years and stick together is kind of a testament to how passionate the team is regarding this kind of game, right?
For sure.
So we're here tonight to talk about physics and networking. These are some highly technical topics that we'll get pretty deep into the minutiae and the detail, but we know this community, right? This community is super interested in that sort of thing because it really tells them how much time and effort we put into this thing. They've been burned by this kind of stuff in the past with other titles, not putting as much effort as they probably could into this sort of thing. And it's something that we take very seriously with Midair because it really affects the player experience, right? What happens when you carve on that hill? What happens when maybe you lose a packet? And how does that affect the match? How does it affect other players? What happens if you're someone chasing after somebody who is experiencing some packet loss? How does that affect the way that you're able to be effective? So, like, those are some of the kind of crucial elements of what physics and networking really truly affects. And when you play Midair, it's going to be one of those things that you may not kind of realize initially, but when you go back and play the other games, it just it feels like there's some I don't know, like you'll kind of notice that like the quality just isn't there. The amount of time and effort just isn't coming through the polish in these sort of core systems.
Mm-hmm.
Anything to add to that, Mabel?
No, I mean that's pretty much it. Whenever we have quite a few testers who still play other games for some reason, and whenever they go back to, we have a couple who play T2 and T1 whenever they go back. It's always funny to hear their comments like, "Oh man, like my disc just doesn't work," or or whatever. And it's it's a nice confirmation that like, oh hey, what we're doing actually works, because it's so subtle. You don't even like when it's working, you don't notice it, right? It's just one of those type of things.
Absolutely.
And we actually do have a console command we can use to turn lag comp off for an individual person, which I do periodically introduce like new people to that sometimes. And that's always entertaining too. Where you're just like, oh man.
So let's talk a little bit about a number. This is a number that we've been kind of tossing around as sort of our goal. And we actually have a question in chat by what I believe you pronounced the numbers correctly is Pivotal. And he's asking, so up to 150 milliseconds, EU versus NA will be good. Can you tell us a bit more about that target and what we've been doing to achieve a similar gameplay experience, if not the same gameplay experience at 150 milliseconds?
Yeah. So 150 milliseconds kind of defines the upper bound for what our sort of general purpose lag compensation code will work at after we apply certain things like smoothing and some other stuff that we need to do to maintain other types of quality. And so, yeah, I mean, basically, if people have under 150 milliseconds of ping to the server, they feel as if they're sort of in a LAN environment, right? The responsiveness is basically of that level.
When you're talking about responsiveness, like, what do you kind of mean by that?
So, video games. Tricky. Let's do a high level. Let's do a high level. It's just, I mean, just shooting your weapon and having it happen immediately, right? Responsiveness is doing things and having the game respond to it quickly and satisfyingly, right? Like you want it to be, you want it to feel like you're actually just doing it and not have this weird disconnect where you click a button and your weapon like has a muzzle flash like 50 milliseconds later or whatever. We want it to happen that frame, for everything to be consistent with that it happening that frame.
So can you talk a bit about kind of how games deal with this sort of thing and like how games have done it in the past and why why our game is a little bit different in how we deal with it?
Yeah, so games do basically rely on all action games, right, rely on some form of prediction, basically, of client-side prediction to be able to handle the fact that the speed of light is far too low, and we can't, a message can't get to a server and back in an imperceptible amount of time. Like you're always going to notice the amount of time it will take something to travel 150 milliseconds or whatever, or even like 40 milliseconds is that's a number you can really feel. If we put all of our actions through that, it would be terrible. You would feel like a game was horribly unresponsive. So client video games sort of do this thing where on your local computer they sort of guess what's going to happen in the future, and using those guesses, they if they mispredict those, they'll correct them later, and I don't know, that's basically it, right? Like the I'm sorry.
Oh yeah, no worries. I mean, this is kind of a highly technical topic, and you're trying to kind of summarize it for people who may not be as technical, right? So it totally makes sense. So maybe you can explain to me a bit about kind of the difference between, say, like network latency and packet loss, because this is something, you pull up your tab menu, right, and you say, hey, my ping is XYZ. I'm upset because it makes me kind of bad at the game, or something, right? But
Right.
I remember us talking about how, like, actually that's a little less of an issue, and what's kind of more of an issue is stuff like packet loss, right? So can you explain the differences between those and kind of their effects?
So yeah, right. So latency is just how long it takes a message to get from A to B, right? And packet loss. So when your computer it sends messages over the internet, it sends them in what we call packets, so those packets basically aren't guaranteed to get to the server on the other side. When it goes through like routers and a bunch of different switches and stuff on its way to get across the internet or whatever.
And so like a packet is sort of like just a bit of information that might contain some stuff about the game you're playing, right?
Or it contains some parts of the image that you're downloading or whatever, right? Like it is like this is sort of an underlying piece of the internet, right? Like we communicate by sending packets across networks.
So what kind of stuff might be assembled? Could it be like maybe the flag position or velocity or like?
Yeah, right. So for a game, if you send packets to the server, they would typically contain things like what buttons you're pressing right now, like what direction you're looking, and what sort of commands that you want to execute, right? The server typically would respond with things like, oh, hey, here's where like all of these characters that are on your screen, like here's where they all are in the world, and there's there's responding projectiles here, responding explosions here, right, and that sort of thing. It basically just would contain the state about the world that you're in.
Okay, got it. So these things are flying around the network. You mentioned the speed of light earlier. So we're basically saying that there's a bunch of wires that go across everywhere that's transmitting data between various points on the globe, right? So like New York to where I live, in Seattle,
right.
Or maybe across the Atlantic Ocean, right? They've got big fiber cables that are transmitting this information.
Right.
Routers are basically devices that are kind of saying, okay, this packet's coming in from Dallas and it wants to go to like London or something. It's got to go through New York first to get to London. Like they do that kind of work. So it's doing all this stuff. It's going through all these hops, and you were kind of mentioning how like that kind of gets complex, right?
Yeah. And so sometimes basically those routers can just be like, I'm too busy to handle this, and just like stop and decide not to actually send the packet, right? So it can just to keep going and not to fall too far behind on whatever its task is. And so that's when you start to get what's called packet loss, where packages don't end up on the other end. And so packet loss can be a problem for us because it sort of introduces this variable latency on the other side. Because if you have a rock solid connection between two sides, it's pretty predictable. It's not great because we have a high latency, right? And we obviously prefer to get things as fast as possible, but or as soon as possible, right? But if the connection doesn't drop any packets, then there's not really then we don't run into too many issues. The real world is not so kind.
Yeah, right. So I mean, does everyone have packet loss issues typically, or is it just a few people who have really bad ISPs? Or
so everyone has like some level. It usually isn't a problem. It's under like 1%, right, for a decent connection. But there's a lot of non-decent connections out there.
Now, when games are optimizing, are they typically optimizing for packet loss? Are they optimizing for latency? Like what is sort of the base level that most games do?
Well, that's a little weird question. Games typically now optimize for what typical network conditions are. So in 2016, we typically don't have like huge amounts of packet loss, even though we might have like some variable like latency. Right, we get some like latency jitter. So like packets don't arrive at like a steady rate. If I send like a packet every 100 milliseconds, it might arrive like at 104 milliseconds, then like 90 milliseconds, right? Like the intervals aren't always even, so they take just a variable amount of time to travel across the network. And so that's sort of a more typical case now.
Got it. And then So with latency, like why the 150 millisecond number?
Okay, so Basically, so to do live compensation, we're basically sort of guessing at things that are going to happen in the future, right? This is sort of how games handle moving, right? If you imagine waiting for your ping for every movement, the game would be basically unplayable. So every game since like Quake World, we sort of predict locally what the player movement is doing on a client, right? All games do this, or well, all action games do this, right?
And actually, real quick, when you're talking about like locally and client, you're talking about like an average player's PC, right?
Oh yeah. So we typically use what's called a client server architecture. So clients are things like your computer, like the players of the actual game, and a server is well the server, right? It's the thing that has the sort of authoritative control over your game simulation. Doesn't necessarily need to be a server sitting in some data center somewhere. It could be a peer in a game that runs on a peer-to-peer network, as you might hear. It could choose one player's computer to be the server, and it's still a server. It's just it's just not the typical kind. Right?
So where you see this is like consoles.
You'll very often see this on consoles. Sort of like if any of you have played like Guns, the Duel when you were younger, like games like that can also. Well, I guess it's not a great example because never mind. But games like the older or the less recent Call of Duties, not like after COD 4, I guess, but like before like COD 3, I guess, where they reintroduced dedicated servers. Games like Halo happens a lot on consoles because consoles are sort of immune to tampering, or more immune to tampering.
Got it. So we're running this client server architecture on ours, clearly because I mean that's been kind of the standard for PC games for a long time, and we've been thinking really hard about packet loss and latency. We've been, and you specifically have been doing a ton of work in dealing with that. What are some of the effects that players can expect to see in our game versus other games that maybe aren't taking quite a detailed look at this sort of problem?
We try and keep. We're basically just trying to keep the experience high quality. Like, ideally, you just don't notice it, right? You don't notice anything changes. And the game you just feel the game just works really well. That's sort of the ideal, is that it doesn't notice. That's why it's kind of sad, is that it's one of those is what is doing its job, you don't notice it type things.
Right.
But those are pretty good things to have. So.
Well, one of the things I noticed when I started playing this is I played a lot of Tribes 1 and 2 and some Ascend. Like when you catch the flag in midair, like you don't actually have to lead it. Like in the other games, you'd kind of throw your body in front of the path of where you thought the flag was going to be, based on kind of your latency, right? And like that's something that I've never had to do now in midair. Like I should be going towards the actual flag object that I see on my screen.
Yeah, right. It's quite the departure. But so. You were wondering about the 150 milliseconds, right? This magic number. So the reason that we do this is because basically what we do is we take in the approach of sort of predicting what other clients are going to be doing in the future on your machine. And so by doing this, we can sort of mitigate some of the latency by sort of just guessing where people are going to be by the time your message gets to the server, right? This is sort of a first approximation of what we actually do. So you can see why we'd have to have like a limit on this, right? Like I can't see someone and just guess where they're going to be a second in the future, because they might change what they're doing. And it will, that'll sort of like ruin my guess, and then we'll, if they change what they're doing, I'll have to update my guess for 1 second in the future. That starts to produce like large errors. And so what we've taken is we sort of just guess where players are going to be in the future, sort of like draw them as being there instead of where they actually are. This works really well in our game because players are extremely fast, but not super unpredictable. which allows us to have like a relatively nicely sized window.
Right. So we have. I'm going to actually answer a couple questions here,
Sure.
and then we'll keep on going. So the small Kiwi says it should be noted that tribes games are particularly apt for this type of interpolation because the speed and momentum are generally high. How does this affect dual mode, for example? Meaning like in situations where people are a bit more mobile, they're changing directions more quickly. How do you deal with that stuff?
Right. Yeah. Honestly, so it doesn't really become that much of an issue. If you can imagine, sort of, this is kind of like what you were doing anyway. Like you would just your brain would do this sort of in the background when aiming before, right? Now we just have the computer to guess for you. The computer is honestly kind of just better at guessing with extreme consistency in these like small, low latency situations. It's true that like when you're arcing through the air, we could honestly probably even have more prediction. I think we could probably get away with more. We haven't tried to push the upper bound too much. It's so other games like Unreal Tournament actually use this and have sort of similar windows actually for LiveComp. And if anyone's ever played UT, they'll know that it's much more twitchy game than our game is, even in even in duels.
And it's more twitchy because people are doing like double jumps and strafing back and forth and that sort of thing.
Yeah, right. Like I mean, in UT you have dodging, you have wall riding, you have all sorts of like crazy stuff that manages to work. And it's got its issues in that game because they have some pretty fast like strafe speeds and all sorts of other stuff that ends up being an issue. But we don't really have those problems, so it works out really well for us.
Right. So does this like basically we've done a bunch of work, done a bunch of research, chose the right thing for what Midair is. We're still kind of tweaking and testing to make sure we get the right balance of stuff because it's not necessarily that you just implement it; it's you implement it in the right situations for the right things. But we have Geist in here who's asking a question about some people were saying like, wow, people are getting a lot of Midairs now. Clearly, we brought a high tier of player into the game, as testers, and so they're clearly very good. I mean, they've been good throughout a series of Tribes games or Tribes like things like Legions and stuff. They've been the top tier players there. But I have to imagine if stuff is just more well represented on your screen and the lag comp and dealing with latency and all that kind of stuff is just better. Like, are people making more mid-airs because of that? Does it feel easier? Is the experience just better, and so you kind of get more confident? Can you explain more about that?
Yeah. I mean, we balance sort of around the reality that we have this extreme consistency in the playing experience now. It's not, a lot of old games you'll see are balanced around sort of some sort of typical online case. Look at the lightning gun in Quake 3 is not balanced. It's like vanilla Quake 3 is not balanced at all. They have nerfed it several times to like 60% of its original damage or something, and it's still the lightning gun and really good. So yeah, I mean, we have to adjust the balance of things for new technology, right? And that for just new internet, even like the difference between the average latencies now and when a lot of these games were made is just massive, right? Like we talk about playing on 56K, or people have 250 ms ping, or more, right? And that just really, I mean, most people would just consider that totally unplayable now, where it'd be like common for playing even within country before. So,
right, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So, Atchis 619 asks, I've read plenty of times that with this system, 170 ping will feel more or less like having a ping of 20. Can you confirm this, Mabel?
Yeah, so that's kind of true. I mean, the predictions start to break down a little bit at sort of the high level, which is where we put the cutoff. We still think that it's better than not having it at all. And at that point, we start delaying projectiles.
So delaying projectiles meaning like delaying it coming out of your gun or what?
Yeah, right. But delaying them coming out of your gun.
Okay. So you're going to start seeing, like in the old games, when you fired and then it took a second and then you fired, to the server or something, like it actually show the projectile leaving your gun on your screen.
Right.
That's kind of what you're talking about, right?
Yeah.
Got it. So Redshifter asks, is the server still making the ultimate decision of when you fire and when you hit?
Yes, right. The server runs the authoritative state over the game. It has total control. The players basically just say, "I'm shooting here. I'm shooting here and now." Right, and then they sort of guess what happens, and they tell the server, "Hey, this is what I thought happened," and the server can tell them, "Yeah, that worked," or give them a correction if it didn't.
Mm-hmm. Okay, got it. So hey guys, make sure you are asking your questions in the Twitch stream. We've got Mabel, he's an expert on how Midair does networking and physics. We're finishing up the network section. We're going to be moving on to physics next. So if you have any remaining questions about the networking, please get them in now. We have a couple questions coming in about physics. Let's see, anything else? I'm just kind of scrolling through here. Kiwi has some questions about non-net code physics. Kind of related stuff. Yeah, go ahead and bring those up. We have another kind of QA session tomorrow, specifically around game modes. You can bring it up then. Let's see. Atchis is actually kind of giving us some praise. He says, after playing with 180 ping for years, being able to shoot at 30 to 40 milliseconds will be a world of difference. I think that we have some folks, at least on our team and in our test group, who are a testament to that. I remember one of the times when we were first testing this, we had Santeri on our team who is in Finland, playing with us, and I think was it on a New York server? No, it was on a Chicago server when we first started.
I think so, yeah.
And it was some really terrible cloud server, and he was like, "Wow, this is actually really good. Like, this is really playable. I can actually be effective in this game." Clearly there's still a little bit of latency. I think he had over 150, but he was really surprised at what he was able to do.
Yes.
So I guess last question, and we'll kind of move on. So Fire in Asia asks, what are you going to do to solve the jitter problem?
So currently there are some issues with jitter. So for those unfamiliar, there's sort of a lot of kinds of jitter in the game right now. So if anyone is watching the cast, they'll notice that like players jitter around some, and there's issues with there's a lot of little issues with that. And so these come from sort of two sources. One of them is I think there's honestly just like a spectator bug, like where things are sort of more jittery in spec than they seem to be when you're actually playing the game. Although I'm not sure if that's just placebo action. And another is that sort of players. So right now we're susceptible to players' connections jittering the delivery of their sort of movement packets, and this is a thing that we're sort of working on fixing now. This is sort of like a common problem in games where they like so. I talked before about how connections have variable delivery times for packets, even if they're sent to the same message repeatedly in short periods, right? And so this becomes a problem when we're sort of interpreting movement, because you don't really want to move a player like when they aren't you don't want to move a player's character when they actually haven't given you any inputs, right? So this is like a sort of tough situation to be as, and what a lot of games do is they sort of just wait for the player to send you a to say like I've moved, and then they move the player on that frame. And so this is how Unreal Engine 4 works by default, and we sort of inherited this system since we haven't super overhauled any of that yet.
Totally. So actually, kind of moving on real quick, because I think this question is actually a little bit related. So we have a gentleman who asks, let's see, where did it go? Wormgod asks, will players be booted for high ping at all, or anything like that, like extreme, or if people lag themselves to gain an advantage?
So yeah, right. So this is this is what we're talking about, right? Where so really low quality connections with a lot of jitter can sort of produce problems for other people. So anyone who's ever played one of these games is familiar with lag capping, right? It's where lag cap is someone with sort of like a low quality internet connection will like try and capture the flag, and they're really hard to hit because they're sort of like jittering all over the place.
Hashtag JP.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not gonna name names. He is. Oh no, they can warp all over the place. So this makes them very hard to hit because they're sort of not moving across your screen in a steady arc. And our client right now can sort of like fill in the gaps when as their delivery is sort of like jittery, but it's not perfect. So we have sort of some ideas for techniques to sort of smooth out delivery. And basically what starts happening is if you have too much jitter for the game to handle, it starts, like, you are the one who experiences the ill effects, and it does what's called dead reckoning, where it sort of just, if it doesn't have an input for you in time, it will just sort of keep doing whatever you were doing. So if you're just holding W, you'll just keep holding W. Stuff like that. Just like just a simple guess. Nothing super fancy, but.
So basically, if it gets really, really bad, then it's one of those things that like you're going to start punishing the player who has the terrible connection. Not like because hey, you're doing this terrible thing, you should be bad if you have like a bad connection, but it's we shouldn't be compromising the experience for the entire server for the sake of one, right?
Yeah. So someone has to lose, right? Like this is always the case with these sort of problems, is that someone comes out as not having the best deal. We just have to decide who's the most important in each situation, and tune the game code for that case.
So someone was asking, and this is we got to move on. So maybe answer this in just a few sentences. Someone was asking about, doesn't a system like this result in a bunch of like non-registered or non-reg for short hits?
So we actually just sort of cheat around that. It effectively doesn't, right? And the reason for that is we don't predict hits with players, moving dynamic objects, because they are actually slightly unreliable. And you could run into issues where you saw an explosion that just didn't even happen on the server. So what we do is we wait for server confirmation to show you an explosion before we actually do anything. And as a small detail, we sort of just move the projectiles. We don't collide the projectiles with players on the client. We sort of just wait for the server to do that. This results in some small visual artifacts. I have some ideas to like sort of patch those over, because we can sort of make educated guesses what's happening, and we can patch those over in sort of predictive fashions that I think will end up being almost unnoticeable. Yeah.
Great. So let's go ahead and move on to physics, because this is obviously a crucial part of what we do. So obviously the whole team has come from a variety of backgrounds in various games, particularly in Tribes 1, Tribes 2, Tribes Ascend, Legions in there as well. Can you speak a bit to kind of what Midair kind of takes from each of those games in the genre? Oh, and also Legions as well.
My favorite. So we basically we sort of look at what we consider to be like the best elements of each game, and sort of try and work those into any sort of design decision. And we do this for actually just everything, right? So for I guess the jetpacks in particular, we sort of feel like T1 has this is a little tough question. T1 has in some senses the best scale. I think like small maps like in like Stonehenge or like Hildebrandt or something, when you're playing them in T1, you sort of feel that people are sort of like this distance from you, where you can sort of like understand where they are in space. As things get further and further away, it becomes very difficult to sort of understand where they are in space, like their depth, because you don't have 3D vision, right, in the game really yet, and so you don't have the depth parallax from your eyes and even if you did, honestly, the things are far enough apart that they basically undergo like fusion at that distance, right? They're not significantly different apart enough for your brain to sort of be able to tell where they are in space. So
like Legion's kind of had that issue, right?
Yes, Legion's has this issue because Legion's has absolutely ridiculous like scales and speeds. Like and things like are flying around at like the speed of sound, and like a thing moving that fast like has no real appreciable like visual features, right? It's just like a dot, then it's not, then it's gone, right? So but this is on a smaller scale, right? Like the difference between T1 and T2. I think T1 really nails this. However accidental, right, or not that is. T1 really has this just down where it feels like really close, and there's a lot of great like chasing action that happens because of the just the distance between players isn't that bad. You can sort of see what you're doing.
Right. So real quick, I kind of want to interrupt you for a second because while we've been talking, we've had another backer. Torpor has pledged $35. You are getting the beta backer tier, so you're getting everything in the Manaborn tier, which includes the progression pass, the closed beta access, the gold crate, the extra gold crate. So you get two gold crates total. You get the digital art book, the Kickstarter exclusive Epic accessory. Thank you so much for backing.
That's a lot of stuff.
It's a lot of stuff for $35. It's one of our best tiers in my opinion. But I just wanted to call you out for backing. Thank you so much. Thanks for tuning in and thanks for backing Midair. So you were just talking about Tribes 1. Let's talk about Tribes 2. Like what are sort of the things you kind of pull from Tribes 2 when you look at the Midair physics?
Not a whole lot. The T2 physics. I think T2's most interesting elements lie outside of the physics. T2 is sort of where we got to see the base game like actually become like a thing people play. Like people play not LT in T2, and it's pretty serious, right? Like T1, a lot of the time that people actually played base was just so long ago that just the average the average level of skill and like we were talking about before, just like internet is just so different that it's almost like not even the same game, right?
Right. So how about Tribes Ascend? I mean, you played a lot of Tribes Ascend. Is there anything interesting there that you're kind of pulling in?
So TA Legions we sort of pull the same fundamental element, which is that they do have some element of air control, which honestly just makes games feel more natural. Like we have sort of this expectation to have air control from games like Quake in Unreal Tournament, where you can sort of just in the air like push buttons and sort of move. It'll sort of like gently float you in that direction, even though it's total nonsense, right? You can't do that. But you can do this in TF2 and Quake and Unreal and a whole host of other video games like Call of Duty, and this is where strafe jumping and other things come from.
So you mentioned capping and chasing as some of your big topics when you're thinking about like what stuff to bring in from different games regarding physics. Can you speak a bit more to that?
So
like, clearly it's super important, right? It's like a lot of the game in CTF specifically,
right.
talking about Arena or other game types, like it's crucial this sort of balance between chaser and capper.
Yeah, you really sort of got it when you said it was CTF, right? Because I think the CTF, like the core like CTF gameplay of like cappers, chasing cappers, is really where this is the most important. And it's really why we sort of looked at T1 for this thing instead of like dueling, where I think Legions honestly has the best dueling out of like any of, well, except for clearly Midair. So being able to sort of like gain speed at the right, like in the right ways, is a big deal. And sort of just being able to like take a DJ and like hit the terrain and like go at either to get to the enemy flag set or like cut off an enemy capper, like that stuff is really what matters the most. And that's why we sort of Yeah, I mean, that's why we look to sort of these games where we think this is done really well. I really like how it fits together
Right.
into on. So
So let's go ahead and take a couple questions from the channel here because
sure.
we've been talking for a while, and I wanted you to kind of talk through the games and everything. Let's go ahead and start here. So I'm going to scroll a little bit up because we had a few in the networking section. Real quick, will fall damage be a big part of the gliding right now? It seems you guys are able to hit the ground at high speeds, steep angles, and turn into a high glide or ski velocity. Shouldn't there be some sort of punishment in terms of speed when you hit the ground at too steep an angle?
Right. Yeah. So currently there's just no fall damage because um, it's just like it was low on the list. It was low on the list of things. It's kind of hard to integrate into the code we have right now because doesn't it doesn't handle collisions particularly well. It's sort of handled in a bunch of different places, and it's not very nice. This makes it hard for us to sort of apply sort of impact damage, is what we call it in Legions, right? Because it's not just falling, right? It's anytime you hit a surface, it sort of depends on the angle that you hit it at. It without being able to sort of handle that in a unified way, just made the code really piecemeal, and it's an ugly change, and for stupid reasons, it was just kind of hard to do. So we're working on a new version of that comes with netcode improvements, or like the de-jittering I talked about,
Right.
and so those things are sort of just wrapped together for logistical reasons. So yeah, I mean, it'll be a part of punishing people, but honestly, it's the same formula we use to determine that is the same formula we use to determine speed loss, right? And this means that they're kind of the same. Or like you get punished in the same amount, right, in speed loss. So when a capper is like running a route, it's not like a super huge deal. Honestly, probably nerfs chasers more than anyone because they're the ones who typically make the worst decisions because they're doing everything on the fly, right? Because they are hugely variable. They have sort of a hugely variable set of starting conditions where cappers typically very controlled. So it just sort of for those reasons, it just wasn't like super high on the list. It can clearly result in people doing stupid things they shouldn't be able to do. But triage.
Right. So sort of ultimately, like, very kind of complicated thing to actually implement, and like wasn't, it's. If it's something like, well, we can implement the inventory station versus let's implement fall damage, we kind of went with inventory station so that for the Kickstarter we could really show what this game can do, right?
Yeah, right. It wasn't a huge return on investment, so
right.
We just fell down the list.
So we have an interesting question. Will there be wind physics?
Wind physics? I don't think so. I sort of on the list of things people don't really like. You sort of just exist in like a vacuum right now. We don't really model any sort of air resistance. I think it sounds neat, but it's usually that kind of thing becomes the kind of thing where players actually experience it. They're like, I don't actually want this. When it comes to like particle effects and other things, though, I think that's a place where it clearly counts, right? Particle effects and clock banners and that kind of thing. It's like those are nice touches, but within the core set of physics, I don't think it's a great feature.
Right. Another question is kind of a fun one. Can disks collide with each other?
Not yet. We do have stubs in the code to be able to handle sort of projectiles colliding with other projectiles. I did think it would be kind of entertaining to see, honestly. I'm sort of in like a wacky sandbox way, and honestly, wouldn't happen with frequency enough for it to matter. Right. I like those sort of touches from that games like Halo and stuff can have.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So coming back to the Kickstarter, we are now at 537 backers. We had that backer who just pledged $35. We are at $52,791. I wanted to call out that there are some backer achievements that are coming up where if we hit 750 backers, then we unlock a special reward. If you look at the Kickstarter page and you scroll down to the backer achievements and rewards, you'll see that we have a big chart with a lot of stuff that you can participate in that also is not just backing, but also, spreading the word on social media. It's liking our pages, it's following us, doing all this kind of stuff that's really going to help us get Midair out there. So please go help us out there. It's going to help, again, spread the word. It's going to be great for everybody. You're going to get some great rewards as you level up your achievements, and also as you kind of discover special achievements behind some of those things. So please go and spread the word. Tell your friends. Get everyone to like the page on Facebook, etc. And keep on posting your questions here in chat as well, so that we can answer more of your kind of concerns, your questions, whatever you have about Midair regarding physics and networking, in particular right now physics. So Dodge Pong asks, do the trees not have collision yet? Kiwi must be happy. And this is, I was about to say, you're going to laugh at this because this is one of the contentious points in some of our game development here.
This is highly contentious. Sure, our current idea is that, so this is sort of a complicated feature to implement, sure, is why it's not there. Well, it would be easier if we had control over our own collision code. Hey, I talked about that. So the idea is that we can have some sort of like soft penalty for going through trees in certain areas, where it sort of just bleeds some amount of speed from you. And if you hit it in the wrong place, at the base of the tree, right, you can actually collide with it like it was a normal collidable object. This is sort of not non-trivial to implement for reasons. It's not the greatest, right? It's kind of an obnoxious feature to write, but so it's sort of just not super high on the list. Well, we'll be experimenting with it in the future.
So Stiggy says, hello, I have many questions. I'm excited to hear your questions. You should totally bring them up. Go ahead and type them here in chat. Siberian Z says, why the hell should trees and rocks have no collision? I guess we're riffing off what you were just talking about.
It's sort of just frustrating, right? When you just run into map Greeble, it can be really frustrating to just have your routes or your just movement stopped by a thing that isn't super has no real significance to the game design, right? A lot of these things are in the game as visual flair, right? And that's the purpose that they're serving in the location that they are, right? They're there for visual purposes, and that can really often just get in the way of the actual gameplay. So we sort of look for ways to sort of lessen the impact of these sort of things. So we're also sort of looking at soft mantling systems for getting you over rocks, which they seem like a little bit of a head scratcher there for mantling when you're going this fast is well, yeah, I wouldn't, it's not vaulting over something in Call of Duty, but it's it still handles it sort of similar way within the code.
And also, by the way, this is not necessarily your position on rocks and trees is not necessarily the same position that all the devs take, right? This is we mentioned as contentious, right?
Right. This is sort of where our current idea of compromise lies. I would just prefer us to just not have any. This is apparently not an option.
Yeah, because you're basically in a battle with the artists, right? Because clearly it makes the map look amazing, right? Having these trees and rocks here and stuff, and if you're a person who kind of likes that stuff, you might go find your favorite rock to go perch on, or set up your turrets on, or things like that, right? So, it is one of those things that again is kind of contentious on the team, but we're trying to strike a good balance between what is providing good visual flair. And also providing good gameplay. So know that this is an ongoing conversation that the entire team is passionate about.
Oh, always.
Let's go and get more of your questions in the chat here. They seem to kind of slow down. I really want to see the excitement come out. Let's hear what you guys have to say about the questions. Tell us what game you played the most, what you enjoy the most, and what sort of things you'd like to see in Midair, or maybe ask us some questions about things you don't quite understand. So we've got Small Kiwi. It's not quite a physics question, but I think it's actually a great one to talk about. He's asking, how important is the new player experience, and how do you guys plan to address it?
Well, new player experience is clearly everything. We're not super sure yet. To be totally honest, a lot of the changes that we made do honestly make the game easier. And some people will always complain about this and be like, "Oh, you're dumbing down my game." It's true-ish, but like some concessions must be made. Um, we think we've made a really fun like high skill game. It's still very fun, still very high skill. Still probably way too hard for a lot of people. Um, you know, so there's that. When it comes to specific things like flow into tutorials and other things, and this isn't a super big concern of ours right now because we have bigger issues. Like the actual game you get once you get past that. But it is something we think about. It does come up routinely, especially when talking about features. Like every time you do anything, it's a balancing act. I think a lot of these just baseline usability improvements, like the stuff we're talking about, where we have physics, we have this sort of a more forgiving physics system, and we have with like skating instead of jump skiing over incredibly like jagged, like 128 vertex in each direction terrain, right? That's not how the game works because it's just way too hard for really anyone to deal with.
Speaking of that kind of stuff, let's talk about. And someone brought up a question. I'm not going to read the question, but I sort of get the gist, and I'm just going to throw the topic out there, and you're going to know exactly what I'm talking about. Smooth ski versus jump ski.
Yeah, I mean it is the topic, right? It's sort of from the beginning, sort of thought about it briefly, but it's not really clear that you could even make a game with jump skiing that was really friendly to sort of anyone, right? I'm not really sure that jump skiing is really friendly to anyone, and so we sort of. So smooth skiing is sort of like an established mechanic that does work. Some people don't like it and have issue with it, but
Well, and we have several T1 players in our tester group. What has been some of their feedback so far?
Yeah, so they, in general they do. They're old, T1 LT nerds. So they'll never quite admit, that it's superior in any way, but in general, like we do see our testers that sort of be able to deal with the skiing. The game is fun. The game is really fun. It's just like amazing to see it played by people in front of people for stuff. But it's all this stuff works very well, and they in general do say that it's easier, which can be interpreted as good or bad. I mean, there's sort of no way around it, right? It's designed to be easier. That's sort of the mechanic. Like jump ski is very hard, and sort of those old games are just very hard in themselves for all sorts of technical reasons, technical and otherwise, right? So it's easier. Does it take away some of the crushing depth of the movement? Yes, absolutely. Right? Is it like the end of the world that happens? Like, no, not really. It's the game, world keeps turning.
Yeah, totally. So what I wanted to do, let's just field one last question here. It's because we're actually coming up against the end of this stream, and there have been a bunch of great questions, a lot of great discussion on this, and this is something that gets asked all the time. Is like, what are your physics decisions and that sort of thing. So this is actually kind of a lower ball question here, but Wormgod asks, is there any limit to how high you can go or how far out of the borders? And I think we can also add in there, we have a couple borders. Like what do they do?
Okay, so currently there's no actual limit on how high you can go. So there's no firm limit on how high you can go. For reasons I won't super get into, there are actually limits on how high you can. The physics impose limits on how high you can go, and it's not just like it's not just like a thing. But there's no ceiling right now. You don't bump your head and stop going upwards, but there are practical limits. over which you just won't be able to get higher, depending on the map, right? And this is a two-part question, but I forgot the second part.
So yeah, the first one was sorry, let me pull up.
How far can you go? Right. Sorry.
Yep. Yeah, the borders. Yep.
So currently, what we the plan is, and see no real reason to change, is we have sort of a mix of out of bounds walls, and so we have an inner wall which sort of functions as limits on the play area for the flag, right? So you can't, you say, you can't exit this area if you have the flag, and if we do, it'll drop from you, after a short period, or like whenever you go out. I don't know, whatever. Those rules are totally solidified. There's arguments on each side of those. And so that's how that works. Then farther out, there is a hard out of bounds grid, where it's sort of the invisible, like the classic invisible wall, the so-called creativity wall, and that's where you stop being able to move outside the map, and that's because, for practical reasons, right? Like there's no real way for us to make a game where you could just go wherever you want, right? Forever for infinity until floating point breaks, right? That's not really practical for us for a variety of reasons, technical and sort of just mostly technical. And so we impose some hard wall when you get farther outside the map. So you can go outside the map, right? You could go outside the flag play area, but it's not the end of the world. This is not totally unlike what you see in like football or some actual sport where there are lines, you can actually walk outside them sometimes, right? It's works okay. I think it's a good compromise between the sort of TA style, where it's just you have the oob and you run into it and it's a wall. Well, you shouldn't in practice ever need to run up against the mission boundary. But because of the engine that we're on, we don't really have a limit on. We don't have as strong limits on map size as TA does, so we never needed to limit maps that small, because TA really pushes the map sizes to the limits of the engine that they could do practically with the terrain having the resolution it does. So.
Mm-hmm. So this is we're actually coming up against the end wall of our to use the wall term. We're coming up to the end wall of our stream here. Thank you so much, Mabel, for coming on and talking to these guys about physics and networking. Yeah. Super interesting stuff. Could probably talk for hours on this thing. I know we have talked for days on the topic. But yeah, so before we head out, I wanted to give a quick update. I wanted to say thank you to Matt for pledging at the $35 tier. Again, you get the beta backer package that we had talked about earlier. You got a lot of great stuff in there. And again, not to diminish the value of the other tiers, but this is one of my personal favorites. I think there's a lot of value in this. I also like the $75 tier, because that's when you jump into alpha access. Then when you hit the $175, that's where things get real sweet and you get the instant access to the game. So definitely consider upgrading, because you could be getting in here and jumping in and playing with us right now. That what you see here on Dewey's screen can be yours for the low price of $175, of course, with a lot of other goodies, including physical goods like T-shirts, keychains, etc. And of course, for those of you who are more generous, we have tiers that will allow you to satiate your palate at the thousands of dollars level. We have many people who've backed at that so far, and we're super, super grateful. You guys are helping us bring Midair to the world in a way that will, you've basically been talking to Mabel right now about how all the polish and forethought we've been putting into things like physics and networking. We're going to bring a game that is highly effective for its genre, and it's going to be a blast to play. So thanks again for backing. We are now currently at 538 backers, over 52,000, going on 53,000 dollars raised. So please keep spreading the word. Please consider upping your pledges, or pledging for the first time, or if you don't have the extra dollars lying around, please go and help us achieve some of those backer achievements by, again, spreading the word on Facebook, liking it, going to the Twitch page, getting followers, etc. There's a bunch of good stuff on there. You can even go post a picture of Chibi Allen, you taking a picture with Chibi Allen, which is hilarious in my opinion. I think it's a great picture. Our concept artist Justin made that. But yeah, so you should definitely go participate in that sort of stuff. It's going to be a lot of fun. You'll unlock some cool rewards, more info about the game, sneak peeks, etc. So please please back us and get involved. Mabel, any final words before we shovel off?
No, thanks.
Awesome, guys. Thanks very much.